and I don't want to jump ahead too much, right? Which is death, right? The afterlife. Obviously, we get to the afterlife through the process of death. Through the process of death. So, in a sense, what ends up happening from this worldview, right? From this pessimistic, nihilistic worldview, right? And this is, we know sort of there's a grander narrative of nihilism, a more holistic account of nihilism, but at least at this sort of rudimentary level of nihilism, how do we make sense of saying that for action has no meanings? Why would my actions have no meaning? One. And the answer is my actions have no meaning in this world because I am not acting as an agent in this world. I am acting as an agent for some other world. So I don't want to be here, right? Let me give you a ghetto example, if that seems too complicated. It's the first thing that popped in my head. It's a horrible example, but I think it's very clear. Imagine that you have a bastard father who doesn't care about the family at all. He doesn't love the wife. He doesn't care about the kids, right? He walks home and he's physically occupying space. He physically spends time in the house. But you recognize that the second he walks in the house, his mind is already on getting out the door and getting in the car and going on about his business. The question becomes, his actions in the house, when he's in the house, what are his actions going to reflect? They're obviously going to reflect his fixation and his preparation with leaving. Everything he's thinking about is about leaving. So it's like, okay, well, dinner, let's wrap this up because I got to go, or I got to get out of here, or I'm not trying to talk to you about that right now. Oh, you're annoying me because I'm thinking about something else. You can imagine what his actions will be like in the confinement of the home if he's always perpetually fixated on leaving the house. Similarly now, if you sort of transpose that analogy onto a much broader sort of ontological structure, if I am denying this house that we live in existence, for something outside of existence, then everything that I do in this world is going to be completely meaningless because I don't fully recognize this existence as being meaningful for me. So insofar as this existence has no meaning for me because I'm fixated on some other world, everything that I do in this world is going to be destructive. When the father talks to the kid, he abuses the kid. When he talks to the mother, he abuses the mother. There's nothing that you can ever do to satisfy or gratify a person like that. Similarly, the individual who's perpetually fixated on a transcendental realm, on an other world, cannot fully appreciate the embodiment and the existence of this world. So action becomes devoid of meaning, right? It becomes devoid of meaning. And I'll give you a really good example in a second. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. We'll return to this idea of death a little bit later. Obviously, psychoanalysts, they jump on this and they go crazy with this idea, rightfully so. I don't know that they'd be able to do it without Nietzsche and others, but rightfully so. Okay, number 4. The only way to refute priests and religion is this. So he's going to tell us how to refute priests and religion. To show that their errors have ceased to be beneficial, that they rather do harm. In short, that their own proof of power, no longer holds good. And what was the proof of power for the priest? The proof of power for the priest was that they have direct communication. They're the liaison, if you will, between God and those immediately below them, the poets and the noble families, and then below them, the masses, right? Remember before, I forget what note it was that Nietzsche said. He said, and actually I have it in here, I can tell you right now. He says it in somewhere like 141, something like that. Yeah, I think it's like about 141, 142. The poet posits himself, the priest posits himself as the highest sort of instantiation of the type man, and then derives and delineates hierarchy based on himself. Well, what ends up happening, right? The last part is the proof of power no longer holds good, which means that you thought, the priest thought, that they were in a powerful position. But what Nietzsche is doing, in a sense, is calling their bluff. You say you're powerful, but I'm going to remove the guise. I'm going to show the world, in a sense, metaphorically speaking, what it is that you really are. You guys, your system of morality isn't contingent on the structure of the dogma. And what we're going to end up doing in the next immediate section, and it's a logical progression in the narrative, is to say that you priests aren't even living like Jesus said you should. Right? Jesus said you should do this. We're about to have this discussion in a second. Jesus said you should do this. You should act this way. You should govern yourself in this way. And you guys aren't even upholding to your own standards. Right? So, in a sense, if it is an attempt, if it's a bid at attaining, amassing power, then you guys are failing at that as well, right? Because the power of God, quote unquote, isn't with you, based on your own standards. This is the argument. Okay, so he says, in short, that their own proof of power no longer holds good. So we'll put fail to hold to power. Fail to hold to power. Now, with respect to the action in the world then, right? Remember, this whole point is, and I would like to extend this a bit more, but I didn't want to go too much on action because it's not technically what I'm interested in. I'm a bit interested in action, but I have other things that I'm trying to accomplish with this lecture series. But with respect to action, it's important to recognize this because I've discussed this before. Remember, I said if you have two individuals, right? You have the moralist or the devotee, and you have the immoralist, and we have X and not X, X and not X. We say that the devotee gets to a crossroads and has to make a distinction between do I do X or do I not do X. And what do? She immediately appeals to the moral imperative. The moral imperative mandates the action, and then the devotee does whatever action the moral imperative mandated. So that there isn't a sense in which I need to use rational deliberation, right? So that rational deliberation isn't required for the devotee, because all the devotee does is, hey, I'm here, it says to go here, I go that direction. It's different from the immoralist, however, right? Because the immoralist, with respect to action, the immoralist finds him or herself in a situation, and the immoralist has to use his or her reason, right? Has to make a rational assessment, has to make a determination based on reason on what ought I to do in this action, and there can be no otherworldly appeal. Therefore, if you're following me now, and this is where it gets deep, right? And I'm trying to keep it simple. Therefore, the meaning, did I write meaning up here? Remember we talked about meaning in number 3, right? The meaning of my action as an immoralist is going to have more weight, is going to be more significant, because the meaning of my act will follow as a consequence of rational deliberation. I'll say that again. For the immoralist, the meaning of my act in this world is going to have more, is going to have greater consequence, because the meaning is derived from rational deliberation. I've sat down, I've weighed the pros and cons, I've processed what's best in my affairs, and so on, and I've made my decision based on the information at hand, right? It's sort of an inference to the best explanation. I act. I recognize that my action resulted in something that affected people that I love, harmed people that I love. The immoralist is not going to say, well, I definitely don't want to jump ahead, but I'll jump ahead a little bit. The immoralist is not going to say that the action is evil, right? It's not going to be this sort of generalized, oh, it's an evil act. It's that were I to have had more information, I might have made a better informed act, right? My action would be better informed. But the significance of my action is always going to be tied. The significance of my action is always going to be tied to the amount of information that I have at my hands. The more information I have at my hands, the more meaningful my action. I'll say that again. The more information I have at my hands, at my disposal, the more meaningful, the more significant my action. If my action doesn't even require information, this action does not require information, right? There's no information that's needed. I was told to do X. That's all I need to know, right? The only information is the information from the external world, right? From the transcendental sort of the